The hidden photographs from the last days of Hollywood's most beloved legends. They were giants on the marquee, but in their quiet, final days, the cameras caught something far more human. A smile held a beat too long, a hand tucked into a coat pocket as if searching for steadiness, a glance toward the edge of the frame, where fame couldn't quite follow. These rare photographs, some shelved for years, others misfiled in private archives, don't scream. They whisper, look closely and you'll see the soft geometry of late afternoon light, the trace of fatigue behind a practiced grin, the way a backdrop, beach, studio, driveway, doorway turns into a stage for unspoken farewells. We think we know Marilyn, Elvis, James, John, but these images are time capsules, sealed with small details that outlast headlines. A cufflink, a crease, a grain of film that trembles like a heartbeat. Tonight, we open those capsules not to mythologize, but to recognize, not the legend, but the person who stood just beyond the flash. The mid-20th century was a golden age of entertainment, and also a time when the private lives of public figures remained shrouded in mystery. Unlike today's era of instant uploads and social media feeds, the images we saw of our favorite stars were carefully selected, often staged, and polished to perfection. Behind those curated portraits, the true, unguarded moments of legendary figures were rarely captured, and even more rarely shared. Marilyn Monroe, with her luminous screen presence, embodied the allure of Hollywood in the 1952nd and early 1962nd. Elvis Presley, the electrifying king of rock and roll, transformed music forever while balancing the demands of fame. James Dean, the symbol of youthful rebellion, burned bright and brief in the early 1952nd. John Lennon, a voice of a generation, reshaped popular music and culture in ways that still echo today. Each of them left behind an extraordinary legacy and a series of fleeting moments that the public never saw. The photographs we will explore in this story were taken in the final chapters of their lives, when the spotlight still shone, but shadows had begun to lengthen. These are not tabloid snapshots or sensationalized images. They are windows into private realities, a quiet afternoon on a porch, a rehearsal that turned into laughter, a pause between takes when the weight of the world seemed to lift for just a second. To understand these photos is to step back into the cultural atmosphere of their times, an era of typewriters and vinyl records, of televised variety shows and film premieres attended in evening gloves and tuxedos. It was a world in which fame was both dazzling and isolating, where a single image could become immortal, yet entire chapters of a life could remain hidden. Tonight, we open these seldom-seen windows, not to dwell on endings, but to remember the people who lived behind the names we know so well. Marilyn Monroe, the summer of 1962. In the final summer of her life, Marilyn Monroe was balancing two worlds, the one the public adored, and the one she kept carefully hidden. The photo in question, taken in July 1962, shows her standing in the backyard of her Brentwood home. She is barefoot on the grass, a loose white sweater falling just off one shoulder, sunlight turning her platinum hair into a halo. Her smile is genuine but faint, as though she's smiling for herself rather than for the camera. The man behind the lens was George Barris, a photographer she trusted. Unlike the staged studio shoots where every curl and eyelash was curated, Barris's photos felt unguarded. He had been commissioned to capture a series of images for a planned memoir, a project Marilyn was both excited about and hesitant to commit to. These photographs were meant to be intimate but hopeful, a way to show the world a softer side of the woman, often trapped inside her own legend. The cultural backdrop of that summer was vivid. Hollywood was still in its golden era, but the industry was shifting. Television was stealing audiences from cinema, and younger stars were emerging. Marilyn, then 36, was in a period of personal and professional transition. She had just been dismissed from the set of Something's Got to Give, yet she spoke often about wanting to return with a performance that would redefine her career. In the photo, the details tell a deeper story. The grass beneath her feet is patchy, the edges of the lawn uneven, far from the manicured perfection of studio backdrops. The sweater slips because she doesn't bother to adjust it, suggesting a comfort in her own space, yet a fatigue in holding up appearances. Her gaze is direct but softened, as if she is letting the viewer in on a secret, that the woman in the frame is not the blonde bombshell, but Norma Jean, at ease for a rare moment. This image remained unpublished for decades, not because it was unflattering, but because it was too personal. It lacked the high glamour her studio contracts preferred, and it revealed something that might have complicated the myth. When Barris finally released it years later, it struck a chord not for its beauty alone, but for its tenderness. It reminded people that Marilyn Monroe was more than a headline. She was a human being who craved warmth and understanding as much as any of us. Looking at it now, you can almost hear the stillness of that summer afternoon, the hum of distant traffic, the rustle of leaves in the Los Angeles heat, the quiet click of the camera capturing a moment that neither subject nor photographer could have known would be one of her last. Elvis Presley, the Graceland porch, 1977. The summer of 1977 was heavy with southern heat in Memphis, and Graceland, Elvis Presley's beloved home, was both a sanctuary and a stage. The photograph we focus on was taken just weeks before the world would lose the king of rock and roll. It shows Elvis on his front porch, dressed not in his rhinestone jumpsuits, but in a simple tracksuit, his sunglasses shielding most of his face. One hand rests on the porch railing, the other clutches a mug of coffee. The morning sun cuts a diagonal line across his frame, illuminating the edge of his jaw and the faint curl of his lip. The photographer was a close friend visiting Graceland. This was not a press event, not a performance, just a quiet morning moment. There's no crowd, no stage lights, only the squeak of the porch boards and the distant hum of cicadas. The friend had been invited to stay for breakfast, and Elvis, always the hospitable host, was chatting about music, old cars, and the gospel songs he had been revisiting lately. By 1977, Elvis was 42 and carried the weight of decades in the public eye. The music industry he helped shape had changed dramatically. Disco was dominating the charts, punk was emerging from the underground, and rock itself was evolving into new forms. Yet, in the American South, Elvis remained a symbol, a bridge between country roots, gospel harmonies, and the raw energy of rock and roll. In the photograph, subtle details speak volumes. His tracksuit is slightly rumpled, as if he had just woken up. His hair, still immaculately styled, catches the light in a way that softens his features. There's a slight tilt to his head, a listening posture, as though he's giving full attention to the person just beyond the frame. The porch behind him, with its white columns and flower pots, is unmistakably Graceland, a place that had seen both roaring celebrations and quiet retreats. This image, for years, was kept within a private album. Friends who saw it said it captured the real Elvis, not the performer who commanded stadiums, but the man who loved simple conversations over coffee, who found comfort in familiar walls. When it finally surfaced, it challenged the way many people imagined his final months. There was no sense of spectacle, no drama, just the grounded calm of a man in his own space. Looking at it now, you can almost smell the coffee drifting in the humid air, hear the creak of the porch swing, and feel the stillness that comes from being home. James Dean, the Fairmount visit, 1955. In the late summer of 1955, James Dean returned to Fairmount, Indiana, the small town where he grew up, for what would unknowingly be the last time. The photograph that survives from this visit is unlike the iconic Hollywood images that cemented him as the face of youthful rebellion. In this frame, he is leaning against a weathered fence outside his uncle's farm, wearing a wool sweater and jeans. His hair is slightly tousled from the Midwest breeze, and there's a faint half smile on his face, the kind that belongs more to Jimmy from Fairmount than to James Dean, the movie star. The photographer was a local friend who had known Dean before the fame, before East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause made him a household name. It was a casual moment, no lighting rigs, no publicity poses. He had been helping stack hay bales earlier in the day and stopped to rest, leaning into the fence post with his hands in his pockets. By 1955, Dean was 24 and on the verge of releasing Rebel Without a Cause to an eager audience. The cultural climate was shifting. Post-war optimism was giving way to a more restless youth culture, and Dean's screen persona, raw, conflicted, and achingly real, mirrored that change. Yet here, in Fairmount, he was just another hometown boy catching up with old friends. In the photo, there's a warmth in his eyes that's absent from his studio portraits. The soft grain of the film captures the play of sunlight on his sweater, the slight slouch of his posture, the rural quiet stretching out behind him. A single barn sits in the distance, its roof patched in places, the fields beyond ready for harvest. This image remained tucked away in a family drawer for years. It was too personal for the magazines of the time, which preferred their stars larger than life. But decades later, when it finally emerged, it resonated with fans as a rare glimpse of the man beneath the myth. Looking at it now, you can almost feel the crisp Indiana air, hear the rustle of corn stalks in the wind, and sense the grounding comfort that comes from returning to the place where your story began. John Lennon, the Dakota Courtyard, 1980. In the crisp December air of 1980, New York City hummed with its usual winter energy, steam rising from subway grates, taxis idling along snow-dusted curbs. The photograph we focus on captures John Lennon in the courtyard of the Dakota, his home with Yoko Ono. He is dressed in a long, dark wool coat, a knitted scarf looped loosely at his neck, and round glasses that catch the pale winter light. His hands are in his pockets, his posture relaxed yet alert, as though he is listening to something just beyond the camera's reach. The image was taken by Paul Goresh, a devoted fan and amateur photographer who often waited outside the Dakota in hopes of catching a glimpse of Lennon. This particular shot, taken only days before his life would be cut short, carries no hint of spectacle. It's not a staged promotional image, nor is it part of a formal photo shoot. It's simply John walking through the courtyard, the iconic arched entrance framing him like a stage he never asked to step onto. By late 1980, Lennon was emerging from a 5-year hiatus from the music industry. Double Fantasy, his collaborative album with Ono, had just been released, marking a period of creative renewal. The cultural moment was electric punk, and new wave were reshaping popular music, while Lennon's return bridged the gap between the rebellious energy of the 1962nd and the evolving soundscape of the new decade. The photograph's power lies in its simplicity. Behind Lennon, ivy clings to the Dakota's brick walls, stripped bare by the season. A bicycle leans casually against the railing, and the courtyard cobblestones glisten faintly from a recent drizzle. His expression is neutral, but his eyes are bright, engaged as if he is halfway between a thought and a greeting. For years, the image lived quietly in Goresh's personal collection, treasured more for its authenticity than for any historical weight it would later carry. When it eventually surfaced, it became more than just a fan snapshot. It became a window into Lennon's final days, a reminder that even global icons have small, ordinary moments that speak louder than their public personas. Looking at it now, you can hear the muffled city sounds beyond the gates, feel the winter air biting gently at your cheeks, and sense the calm before the rush of a life lived under constant attention. The Lost Contact Sheet. Among the archives of celebrity photography, there exists a quiet artifact that almost never saw the light of day. A contact sheet containing never-before-published frames of Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, James Dean, and John Lennon, all taken by different photographers, all in their final months. This sheet was not the work of a single artist, but rather a chance compilation found decades later in a retired editor's belongings. The story goes that in the early 1982nd, a magazine photo editor was clearing out old files when she discovered a plain manila envelope labeled only "Hold Personal." Inside was a strip of contact prints. Monroe barefoot in her garden, Elvis on his porch, Dean at the farm fence, Lennon in the Dakota courtyard. Each tiny frame was marked with grease pencil, small circles, crosses, and notes like "too soft," "off-brand," or "private." Yes, in the world of editorial photography, such marks meant the images were never intended for public release. They might have been seen as too intimate, too unpolished, or simply inconsistent with the image studios and managers wanted to project, and so they were quietly filed away, bypassing both the newsstands and the public eye. For nearly 30 years, that envelope sat in a storage box, surviving office moves, reorganizations, and even the closing of the magazine itself. When it finally emerged, the photos were not only preserved but perfectly intact, each one a small, unfiltered truth from a time when truth was often edited out of the frame. What makes this discovery remarkable is not just the rarity of the images, but the way they seem to speak to one another across time. Different decades, different circumstances, yet the same quiet humanity shone through. It was as if these legends, in their unguarded moments, were quietly reminding us that fame is a costume, and that the person beneath it is what lingers in memory. These rare photographs are more than images frozen in time. They are whispers from lives that once burned brightly under the world's gaze. Marilyn, Elvis, James, and John. names etched in our collective memory, each left behind more than their work. In these final, quiet moments, we see them not as distant icons, but as people navigating the same currents of joy, fatigue, reflection, and hope that shape us all. They remind us that the most profound truths often hide in the in-between spaces: a half smile on a porch, the lean against a fence, the walk across a courtyard. These are not the staged farewells of a legend, but the everyday gestures of a human being. Perhaps that is why these images resonate so deeply, because they bridge the distance between the myth and the mortal. Which of these moments speaks to you the most? And what stories might your own photographs tell years from now, when they, too, become time capsules?